الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الأخلاء يومئذ بعضهم لبعض عدو إلا المتقين صدق الله العظيم ببركة إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات إنك سميع مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. The ayat that I've recited, the translation of this ayat is, close friends will turn into enemies of one another on that day, except the pious. To understand this verse better, I'd like to present two stories. On the Day of Judgment, and this is a story that we've heard on past Jummahs from Mufti Sahib, that two friends will be presented on the Day of Judgment. They will be asked about their friendship with each other. One of them will say about his friend that whenever I wanted to do any good deeds, this friend of mine was an obstacle for me. He stopped me, he prevented me from doing good deeds. He stopped me from going to the masjid or doing certain such and such good deeds. The other friend will say the same thing, that this friend of mine, he stopped me. He prevented me from doing good deeds. The decision will be made about them to put both of those people into the hellfire. Similarly, another group of people will be brought, two friends. They will be asked about one another and they will say that this is a very good friend of mine. He always encouraged me to do good deeds. He always encouraged me to whether pray salah, go to the masjid, and so on and forth. He encouraged me to do good deeds. The other friend, he will be asked, and he will say the exact same thing, that this friend of mine is a very good friend. He encouraged me to do good deeds. So this one story, a short story, something that will happen on the Day of Judgment, tells us about what type of friendship that we should keep. Now, the ayat says that close friends will turn into enemies. So we saw that with the example of the first two people that were brought. And except the pious, and we saw that with the second set of friends that were brought. Now, to understand this story, this is a different story that Imam Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, mentions in Ayyuha al-Walad. Ayyuha al-Walad, before going to the story, I'd like to mention, this is a summary of Ihya al-Ulum. Imam Ghazali is very famous for writing Ihya al-Ulum. Ihya al-Ulum is a voluminous work about lots of things, mainly about curing the heart from spiritual diseases. So one of his students, one of Imam Ghazali's senior students, he wrote a letter to Imam Ghazali that you've written a voluminous book, Ihya al-Ulum. I'd like if you could summarize this, because not many people might have the time to read it. And I would like something that the student himself is saying, that I'd like something that I can always refer to, something I can always keep with me, something I can always look back after and keep with me in reading. So Imam Ghazali writes, Ayyuhal Walad, which translates to something along the lines of, oh my dear boy, oh my dear son. This is a summary of Ihya al-Ulum. And in this, Imam Ghazali, he mentions a story about friendship between two individuals. One is Hazrat Shaqiq Balkhi alayhi rahmah and his friend Hatim al-Asam rahimahullah. These are two big awliya from around the 1st century, around 200 Hijri. So one day, Shaqiq Balkhi asks his friend Hatim al-Asam that we've been friends for 30 years. Our friendship is about for 30 years. Have you gained anything from me in these 30 years? So he responds and sings, I have gained 8 things from you. I've gained 8 things from you. The first thing he says, I realized that all the people that love me, all the people who hold me dear to their heart, when I die, the only point that they will come to is at the corner of my grave. That one thing that would actually come with me in my grave are my deeds. So I left the love of anybody, and I made my good deeds the most beloved to me, because this is that one thing that will come with me in the grave. The second point he says, I denied my soul pleasure. I fought the desires of the nafs. Why? Because by fighting the desires of the nafs, I got to a point where my nafs it was satisfied. It enjoyed the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we call in Urdu, riyazat, mujahidat. That I fought my desires, I fought my nafs, until it came to a point that it was obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Third point he says, he realized that everything will perish. Everything that we have physically, materialistic, everything were present, except that was that which is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, I gave away all my wealth to the poor and needy. I gave everything I had, and that way I secured provision for the future. As we know, when you give sadaqah, you will get reward for it on the day of judgment. So he said, I gave everything away and securing provision in the future on the day of judgment. The fourth point he says, I saw that people thought that dignity lied in whether you had wealth, whether you had where you came from a big clan, a big family, a big family name, or was it where you were from like a warring tribe that won battles. I read in the Quran, I found that dignity is only for those who are righteous. Dignity stems from righteousness. So I took righteousness upon me, and I made righteousness what I did. And he said, I chose righteousness. This is his fourth point. The fifth point, he says, I never envied anyone. The fifth point, I had never envied anyone because I realized that anything that anyone has, anything that I have, is from the distribution of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by me objecting, having envy is like, why does he have something that I don't have? Or why don't I have this? He said, by doing this, you are objecting to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has distributed. He says, I took this out of my heart. Anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has distributed, I'm content with. I'm satisfied with that. The sixth point, he says, I saw people becoming enemies of one another. I saw enmity amongst the community. He says, I find in the Quran that enmity, this shaitan is your true enemy. So he said, I left the enmity of everyone except for shaitan. And you see, each of these points are an entire Jummah lecture of themselves. But since this is from the constraint of time, going through it quickly, but if you think about it, if you employ any one of these things in your life, imagine how big of a change that your life will have, and as a community, how much our community can improve. The seventh point, he says, I realize that everybody works hard for the world. Everybody works, you could say in this society, everybody works for money. Everybody works to get a big house, a car, etc. He said, I realize that everything, he realized my sustenance is guaranteed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, I became content with that. And if you think about it, he's basically saying he's stress-free, anxiety-free. He doesn't have that because he knows that anything he is to get is guaranteed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his sustenance. The eighth thing he says, relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, I realize that when you rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is sufficient for you. All your affairs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfills them for you. And these are the 8 points he mentioned. And at the end, Shaykh Shaqiq al-Balkhi alayhi rahmah gave him a dua that in these 30 years, this is the stuff that he gained from these 8 points. Now think about it, these 8 things, most people, or I would say most people, spend their entire lives not being able to even get one of these. And Allahu Akbar, he had all 8 of these, and you could say this is a sign of wilayat. These are 2 big awliya of kiram from the 200 Hijri, from the 1st century. Now, when we look at another thing that we need to look at is reflect and think about our friend circles. Are our friends taking us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or are they taking us away from Him? And when we reflect on that, now we make decisions on who we need to keep our friendships with forever and with who we need to distance ourselves from. And to find somebody like this, to find a friend like this, like the ones who inspire you to do these things. Staying in their company, you act upon these 8 points. It's very rare. Imam Ghazali says this is like finding red sulfur. It's rare. He didn't say impossible, but very, very rare. And he says when you find someone like this, when you find someone's company who's like this, you hold on to that person forever. But a question arises in this day and age, where do we find someone who's like this? Where do we find someone who's this pious? And when we go to their company and sit in their company, we become like that. It's very, very rare to find someone like that. The advice I'd like to give is, make Imam Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam, your friend. Sit in his company. What do I mean by that? By reading his books. These, like, for example, Ayyuhal Walad, it's addressed in the second person. Everything he says, you should do this, or you that. It's as if he's directly speaking to you. Same thing with other books like Ihya al-Ulum. He basically goes through each and every ailment of the heart, every disease of the heart, and he gives you the tool to identify, do you have that? And then he tells you how to cure it. Same thing with like his other books, Mukashat Fadl Qulub. He has the facility of happiness. Lots of his books he has that he addresses you in the second person, and he tells you how to solve these spiritual ailments. Whatever wrong I said is from my nafs, and whatever right I said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana